Hello, and boom, according to that I am live. Welcome, my name. Okay, we're back. I accidentally yanked out the USB. Oh, I can see what that's doing. It's not good. Okay, I accidentally yanked out the USB cable. So there we go. That is some more technical settings, technical features of the show, as always, present. Anyway, good to see you all in here. Good to see you. We've already got Shubis rocking in here first, the man from Panama, hopefully enjoying a morning coffee there. We've got Robert Brooker. Yeah, good news that you're coming to Japan. And yeah, glad to hear that you are doing well by the sound of it. So that's always good. We've got Auntie, I believe Auntie L is Auntie Liana, unless it's someone else, but good to see you, Auntie L. DJ Sunny Side Up. Hello, beautiful people indeed. Jack H, good evening. Am I still being forced to run in the evening because of the weather, or is it getting a little better? Yeah, still basically. I mean, we had some incredibly hot days last week, like 38 degrees for a few days. It's not that bad, but it still is too hot to run safely during the day. So I'm running at night or in the mornings, basically, to avoid that. So yeah, still trying to avoid the heat. So yeah, DJ Sunny Side Up had a nice surf session today and yesterday. Well, glad to hear that you're celebrating well, I guess Marine Day was on Monday, beach day, but yeah, that signals the time of year when everybody goes to the beach at once, where I find normally the beaches get too crowded. So I'm glad you found a nice beach that you could go to. And yeah, we've got Dan H. Good to see you indeed, Dan H. And welcome everybody indeed. We've got 10 people in the chat right now watching, 4 likes. I don't mind if you wait to the end to assess, but I do appreciate the likes. They're always most welcome, so feel free to do that. I've got my mobile Twitter hooked up to this. I've given up on the iPad, so hopefully that'll work okay this week. And yeah, hope everyone's having a good week. My week's been relatively uneventful. School holidays have just started here in Japan. So yeah, although we've just, yeah, it's getting incredibly warm, of course. But yeah, not a lot going on. I haven't been watching much in particular. I've been enjoying the new series of Foundation. I actually rewatched the first season because I found it a little bit hard to figure out what was going on. I couldn't really remember. So I've been enjoying that. I watched the whole series of The Diplomat on Netflix, which was, it was okay. It was watchable. It wasn't the greatest thing ever, but it was okay. I really like the woman, Kerry, is it Kerry Russell? I think she was in The Americans. The Americans was awesome. But yeah, other than that, it's been a pretty low-key week for me. So yeah, hope that you are all doing well wherever you are. And yeah, Shubis went to a beach the first time in a couple of years. Rather depressed city with big plans for tourism. I'm glad to hear that there's a city with big plans for tourism there in Panama. Yeah, seems logical. Well, not necessarily. I guess it's also famous for swamps and so on, but there should be some nice beaches down there. The countries around it, like Costa Rica, of course, are famous for the beaches. So, must admit, I'm curious what a nice beach there looks like. Aaron, great to see you. Our moderator has arrived. Aaron, are you still in Japan, or have you gone back now? But anyway, it was awesome getting to meet you for lunch the other day. That was great. And yeah, Tokyo 503. Indeed, well said. Couldn't have said it better myself. The good news is that rainy season has ended. In fact, that's right. That was announced formally today. It hasn't really been raining in Tokyo, but we get these nighttime squalls, and for the Met Office in Japan, they count that as still being rainy season. So we're now officially out of rainy season, although it really feels like we've been out of that for a while. But yes, indeed, the good news is that rainy season has ended, and the bad news is that rainy season has ended. It gets into the now Taisho season, which, yeah, it's funny. Japan has something like 72 micro seasons. They talk about the 4 seasons, but Japan does not have 4 seasons. It has very distinct weather seasons. And we are currently in what's known as the Tai Shou, Tai being big and Shou being heat, the big heat season. This is the time of year you do not want to come to Japan. Anyway, as I've said before. It'll get better in about September, really stably from October. But yeah, Aaron's in Hiroshima. Oh, glad that you're getting around. Of course, that's right. You're doing a bit of a grand tour. I hope you're enjoying it anyway. It's a lot of traveling around. But I hope you are indeed enjoying that. Andrea Morboy, good to see you. Sad about that the Tour of de France is over. But the females started their 8-day tour today. Okay, well, that's pretty cool. In fact, I should keep up with that bit of myself. I have a cousin who actually works on the teams that support the Tour de France and the other sort of professional cycle races around Europe. So, yeah. Now, Aaron confirming now is not the best time of year to come touring around Japan, although, kudos to you for going for it, Aaron. And, people who come here on the summer vacations, I guess that it makes sense. So, yeah, anyway, we've got lots of people locked in, 18 concurrent viewers. That's actually quite a lot. I do think next week is going to be, I think we said the final week of each month. Is that what we said? I think that's what we said. That's easy enough to remember. So we'll look to do next week's show with Victor. I'll get in touch with Victor this week, and we'll do another 2.5 Oyajis instead of Tokyo Tonight or Tokyo Tonight Oyajis. I don't know. He's not in Tokyo, so that we can't really call it that. But we'll do something like that. Am I going to risk snapping the USB cable again if I adjust this mic? I'm going to do that. So yeah, anyway, let's jump into the topics. I kind of messed up last week where I like to do things in reverse order. I like to go back to the start of the week and go through the week. The problem being that I picked the show's title last week from the most recent stories, and I didn't get to them through the course of the show. So I'm going to start top down. I'm going to start from tweets I've done today. Yeah, we'll see how far we get through. We might make it through to last week. I doubt that's going to happen. We never get that far through. Kerberos 10 shares made it. I'm glad that you did. You hate the Tour de France for personal reasons. That's a I don't know, Lance Armstrong fan perhaps. I each to their own. You don't have to like the Tour de France. But there you go. So yeah, as Aaron points out, more back to my normal time, my old time, so more people come in. I definitely feel that. Yeah, it was, I never quite got into the right rhythm when I was in America. I really need to be able to do it now. This is like the time of week where I'm not going to be out doing anything. This is when I, is the most stable and easy time for me to be able to do things. So yeah, we'll definitely do that. Wow, the Shure SM7B, it's a fancy microphone. Yeah, I like one of those myself, although this is a pretty good microphone, the old Yeti Blue. So anyway, let's jump in. This is my Twitter. It's kind of enlarged, which I guess makes it look a little bit blocky, but that's all cool. This lets me zoom in. So starting with watch the show. I guess you already know that if you're here. Yes, some people talking about Nippon.com, a great website to follow, by the way, just talking about how there are problems for elderly and others now, but with increasing elderly, there are apartments, landlords often don't want to rent out to people. People say foreigners, for example, and that's true, but there are other categories of people, for example, that they don't want to rent to. For example, people without a parent or a guarantor, or in some cases they say elderly people because they're worried literally that they will die alone in the apartment and leave the landlord having to sort it out. People with disabilities and so on, they just don't want to accommodate people. So in Japan, I suppose, in spite of rents being relatively modest compared to America, landlords still do have a lot of discretion over who they can let in and who they can't. So the government's looking to assist that, to which I would say, we've talked about this a lot already on the show. There's a massive oversupply of empty housing in Japan. Just make that easier to use. Japanese are very strong when it comes to property rights. They oppose, even like you try to widen roads, stuff which is done routinely in many other countries. Government forces you to take compensation and they widen the road. In Japan, you have to negotiate with every house. Simply widening a road can cost, millions of dollars to do. So things like, even for abandoned houses, the government exercising rights of like forcing you to make it available for rentals or something like that, or, making it easy to sell or whatever, is controversial in Japan. But again, they have to do it. They have to make this stuff. Japan has a huge housing oversupply. Of course, yeah, they could look at it about changing rules on discrimination about renting as well. And theoretically, rules that would become more favorable to, for example, making it harder for lawyers for landlords to turn down the elderly and so on, should benefit foreigners as well. Although there's been a lot of progress already made in the case of foreigners. So hopefully that's something that we'll feel the benefits of, but it's been a long issue in Japan. Jack H there vouching for the quality of the mighty Yeti Blue that I'm using, even though I'm speaking quite softly into it. Hopefully you can see me okay. Kustos, glad that you can make it Kustos, and don't forget to throw a peanut or a like. Indeed, both are welcome. Thank you, Aaron. Cobra Tenshi, it's a long story, but in short, you were returning from Japan Expo in Paris and was looking for a gas station and was running incredibly low. The Tour de France blocked you 500 meters before one. Yeah, that would do it. That would do it indeed. So sorry about that. Not that I am the Tour de France. It's not my fault. Anyway, other stuff that's going on. Yeah, I asked for recommendations for places where I could get rid of like used bicycles. For example, my son's outgrown his bicycle and it's kind of hard to find places I can sell it. By the way, I'm super overexposed. That's okay. Someone made a recommendation of an app, although I had already decided at that point that I'm just going to send it to the Soleil, which feels like a waste, but it's kind of hard to find ways to give away stuff at the moment in Japan. Kind of funny, this is in Japan that there are like Mad Max fan clubs that do up their cars. I mean, these are basically old Australian cars that are done up, so it's kind of cool that they were able to do this in Japan. I don't know if they did it by importing the old Australian Ford Falcons or whatever, or if they were actually modified Japanese cars to make them look that way, but that's super cool. There was another disturbing, I don't like to do crime news very much, but there was a case in Osaka today where someone wielding a knife went a little bit crazy on the train, and he didn't exactly stab, he like cut the hands and so on and poked at like 3 or 4 people. However, he was arrested, and there's video of it here. Just thinking the other day, I was showing the video of the police simulating exactly the scenario of a crazy person with a knife in a train station. And, it was all very well set up for a demonstration where it was all sort of cordoned off by a crowd and people had these long pokey sticks and, they fired a Spider-Man net at him. I'm like, where's the Spider-Man net? It's like false advertising. Clearly the person here was having a bit of a mental health crisis, that's it. And now, actually, come think of it, you can see they do have the pokey sticks there, so that is legit. But on the one hand, I mean, someone who's clearly having a mental health, crisis. Again, I'm glad that Japan's a country where they just don't shoot the person instantly. The feeling might have happened in some other countries, not naming any country in particular, but of course America. They were able to take him, and he was charged with attempted murder. So we'll see what happens with that. Again, I hate it when this sort of thing happens on public transport. This happened right by the Kansai Airport train station, actually. So the location as well was disturbing. But anyway, glad that they got him. Also reminds me, by the way, last week there was actually a shooting in New Zealand. Super rare that there was any sort of mass shooting in New Zealand, but there was a mass shooting. Somebody apparently with a shotgun went to a construction site where they were working. They were on parole and actually being tracked, but they were allowed to work. But somehow they had a shotgun. They went into work, and something like 10 people were shot. The building where they were working was a hotel that's under construction, which is right beside the building where I used to work when I was in New Zealand, and I also have co-workers in a building downtown and another building beside them right now. So, hearing like that was very disturbing as well. Particularly, I never heard of anything like that in Auckland, in the city that I'm from. The person there ended up shooting himself at the end of it, it sounds like. So that was disturbing right at the start of the Women's World Cup. But some awful things going on there at the moment. Anyway, back into the comments and the topics. Yes, scary indeed. He's wearing a mask. He is wearing a mask. But yeah, taser time. Well, indeed, that is one way. Again, you have to respect the patience of the police, the way that they deal with this, however. But that said, he's kind of done for in the Japanese justice system. For those interested, Japan does have a death penalty, but you have to actually murder. The principle is like multiple. It has to be a mass murder. It has to be like even 2 is unusual, let alone more than that. So, and in this case, the people were injured. So there you go. Travis Moore, good to see you. Long time no see in the chat. We've got you. I was just thinking, Rinku Town is that station just before you cross the bridge to the airport. Indeed, that was the station where it happened. Not sure if the person was from there, of course, or if he is on his way to the airport or whatever. But, anyway, shouldn't have been there. Some articles coming out today from a bunch of sources. The Japan Times also covering that. There's new sources on the involvement of Japanese civilians, they call them, or basically, not unofficial participation in the Korean Civil War. I kind of think, well, it's kind of interesting, but at the same time, I mean, Japanese after World War II, for example, acted as military advisors to the Kuomintang, to Chiang Kai-shek's army when they were evacuating to Taiwan and holding off the communists. So, there was that. In Indonesia, of course, many Japanese veterans who were true believers in the idea that Japan was there to liberate Asia from European colonialism. People say, of course, characterize what Japan did as being Japanese colonialism, just replacing the Europeans with themselves. But there were true believers in Japan that they were genuinely liberating these colonies. And there were a lot of Japanese who stayed behind to support Indonesians who wanted to fight back against the Dutch coming and reestablishing colonies in Indonesia. So there were a lot of Japanese involved in these conflicts that happened around Asia after World War II. Absolutely not surprising that that would include Korea. Especially given the number of Japanese that live in Japan, and the number of Koreans that live in Japan as well, and the sort of intermarriage that happened. But yeah, some new documents coming out about that. Kustos saying, like-giving question. By the way, if you type my name, it's easier for me to notice. Hey, Demaster, good to see you. Type my name, that way it'll flash up orange, and I know it's for me. Since I got back from the US back to Japan, did I notice anything of the competence crisis? Harold Robertson wrote something quite interesting on the causes of US disasters. I don't know what the competence crisis is. Are you referring to a competence crisis in America or Japan? I haven't really noticed a competence crisis, as I understand that term to mean, in either country. Where I was working in America, everyone was like super smart. But there again, I also find the same thing through a different cultural lens here in Japan. So on the causes of US disasters, so I assume you mean something on the US side. Again, I work in a kind of a startup-y tech company. So from that perspective, I guess I'm used to seeing people who are pretty good at constantly dealing with crises. It's pretty much the nature of the job. And we were dealing with that more than usual in America. Certainly I could see things like political paralysis and so on, and media paralysis. But I'm dealing with people who actually deal pretty well with crises. Like, that's basically the nature of the job. I don't know. I can't really speak to that. But I'm interested if you've got more details there, Kustos. Shubhas, and US skilled workers are in short supply. I don't know. There are plenty of smart skilled workers. It is true that America does rely on those foreign visas. They rely on those very smart Russians and Chinese and Indians who come into Japan to do a lot of the brain work in America. But there again, America, in spite of everything, in spite of America, punching itself in the face pretty much, and the increasing idiocracy sort of happening there, is still a country that attracts smart people, if for nothing else. The fact that if you're a smart person, you can go to America and make a better life for yourself there than you can. You can earn more money there. You can start companies more easily. The culture of the country is very entrepreneurial, and that still attracts smart people. Here's a crisis as to whether America is able to raise the smart people that it needs. But I don't know that, well, there's only a shortage to the extent that there's a lot of jobs in America that require very smart people. But I've got a lot of respect for America. But sure, the idea of are they getting enough? And there is this thing throughout the economy that you definitely see, of kind of pushing people into lower value work, which you definitely see anyway. Tokyo 503. Speaking of the Women's World Cup, Japan just got off to a fine start with a 5-0 victory over Zambia. Entertaining stuff. I didn't watch that game. I heard about New Zealand, I think, winning their first ever game, beating Norway in the opening game, which was good for New Zealand. Good to hear that Japan is doing well. So Shubhas pointing out the TSMC postponed factory construction due to lack of skilled workers. Well, that's true. There are workers in specific fields, particularly in like advanced manufacturing. This is something where America's become dependent on China because they just can't manufacture the way that China can. And sure, semiconductor jobs, that's a specialized industry where they don't have the skilled workers that that Taiwan and Korea and China and Japan have. That's true. Japan, America sort of has gotten kind of big and lazy around, and mainly due to Intel. So yeah, you're right. That is certainly a thing. Anyway. I was hunting around, by the way. I've been looking at thinking I want to go do little drives more like I was doing in America. And one thing I really enjoyed about America was renting, either share cars where you don't get to choose the car, but they're available. And in Tokyo, there are 2 around. There's, in fact, what is it called? It's called Karapo or something. I can't remember. I haven't joined that one. I've joined Oryx because in my neighborhood they have a lot of Oryx cars, and these are cars that are just kept in random car parks. So it's quite a lot like Zipcar. It's basically Japan's version of Zipcar is Oryx, where these things are parked in specialized spots, and you can go get a nap, and you can go and reserve these cars and go use them for certain periods of time. And for Turo, I really enjoyed Turo just because you could pick out specific types of car and go drive them. And I even did a list and sort of my ranking of cars at the end. And a lot of those I picked specifically. I was looking for an equivalent of that today. And there is a basically Japanese Turo is Anycar, Anyca, run by DNA, which is one of the big internet companies in Japan. And it's an all Japanese, there's no English interface, but it looks pretty much exactly the same. It works the same as private owners who lend out their car. And you pay the money and you make an arrangement to go use the car and drive. And I found out this is also and pretty affordable. You can get and there's a lot of cars on there that I've never driven before that I'd like to drive. So I think for the idea of maybe getting out more on weekends, as well as maybe going and running in some different locations, it'd be really cool to use these cars. Of course, you can use the trains, and that's another thing I should do more. But I think from Tokyo, if you want to get out to like hiking trails and stuff like that, it's good to know, or get out to the beach or whatever. It's good to know that there are these car services available, and I'm going to probably give them a try. So yeah, I'll let you guys know. But if you're interested, if you're coming to Japan and you're interested in driving, yeah, these services look pretty good and pretty reasonably affordable. So I'm planning to try them out, and I'll let you know what I think of that. Moving down, yeah, Costco apparently has just decided to, in Japan, there's a big debate about raising minimum wage, it varies by prefecture to prefecture because, of course, some prefectures are cheaper to live in. But generally, it hovers around 850 to about 900 yen, and there's, increasing pressure even from the government for employers to pay people more money because the government wants wage-driven inflation. And Costco has decided to, for all of its warehouses, pay a uniform increase from something like 950 yen to 1,500 yen per hour across the whole country, regardless of whether it's Gunma or Tokyo, to pay them the same, which means particularly if you live in a more affordable prefecture like Gunma, it's quite affordable. Unseen Japan's coverage points out that there was some backlash from other small employers in places like Gunma, where they're having trouble finding enough people to, for example, they can't find people to work in the convenience stores, as well as the gas stations and places like that. And having Costco come in and paying basically 1.5 times what everyone else is doing. Some people are saying they're paying too much. It's ruining everything for the rest of us. We'll go bankrupt if we pay more wages. This has been a debate that's been happening for years, where businesses have been saying they can't afford to pay people more wages. It'll collapse the companies. But it's kind of, again, Costco is kind of calling the bluff, and it's kind of a good thing if there are companies that are doing that anyway. Jack H, with Costco raising the minimum wage, you heard on Twitter, some people are complaining it will kill small businesses. Well, that's what this article was talking about. Some people, in Gunma in particular, some local businesses were saying that it would kill local businesses, that they won't be able to find workers. They'll all get drawn to Costco, and they're already struggling to find people who will be able to work in those places. But we can't pay that. So a gas station owner groused, I can't pay 1,500 yen. We can't behave like a big multinational corporation. So, I mean, this is a case where I think a big multinational corporation is actually doing the right thing. Yeah, there's always a debate for that. Black Tengu coming from 44 degrees Celsius, Athens. Good God. I hope you're okay. Please, you've got air conditioning there, right? I do hope that you are staying inside and staying air conditioned, and that sucks. Yeah, do take care there, Black Tengu. Remember, drink lots of water. That's what gets people, is they forget to drink water. Yeah, that sounds awful. Continuing on, it's actually something which I care about quite a lot. Typically when I go into work, or depending on where I walk, the nearest convenience stores to me are Family Mart and 7-Eleven. And it always bugs me that I always get the large, I like cafe lattes. And if I get a cafe, and just to go back a little bit, some context. If you're ever in Japan, of course, Starbucks and everything is actually very, very good, and it's much more affordable than in America. You pay about 400 yen, which is about $3.80 for like a large coffee at Starbucks. However, it took me a while to realize I was never going to have convenience store coffee, because I thought that's just going to be like crappy drip coffee is what I was assuming. And it was years before I tried. When I tried the local convenience store coffee, they put these machines in there. It's not drip coffee. They actually put beans in the machines and they grind them. They've got these massive machines that basically make coffee, I would say, pretty close to being as good as a good sort of chain coffee place, as good as Starbucks, and they're so cheap. And so yeah, I was using Family Mart a lot, and I'd often get a large latte, 310 mils. It's a nice big cup, and it gives you quite a kick. It's got a lot of coffee in it, and it tastes good. So I was always getting that, but when I go into work, I'll get a 7-Eleven cafe latte, and I get a large size for that. And I was thinking, this feels like the small size or the medium size at Family Mart. So, Japan being Japan, if I Google, comparison of convenience store coffees, there's like 100 websites that have done in-depth comparisons of taste, value for money, metric, all these sorts of metrics and ratings. And it's interesting, it was just interesting to do. I just pulled this together and put it in English. And it indeed turns out Lawson apparently gets the most consistent high ratings for the convenience store coffee. And I must say the quality of this is outstandingly good. You've got to try it. And look at these prices for 170 mils. So 350 mils is a can of Coke, right? It's like, it's quite a big drink. So yeah, they've got a medium-sized 170 mil for 180 yen. You can see the different values there. But basically, if you get a large size Family Mart latte, you're paying 67 yen, or about 40 cents per 100 mils. that equates like $1.20 can of Coke, for 350 mils for volume. And the large one is like 210 yen. Sorry, it's so in fact. So what is that? That's like $1.70 US for 310 mils, and it's really, really good coffee. So by volume and value for money, Family Mart wins, and I quite like the taste as well. So yeah, good to know. If you're ever in Japan, do try it. I don't know if other people agree with me or not, but yeah. And yeah, the Family Mart latte is 180 ml for the medium. I always get the large, although I've noticed lately I don't need the large. The medium's enough. But Savas Musician, good to see you there in the chat. Yeah. DJ Sunny Side Up, AI will just take over you. I'm not sure if you're talking to me about that. But yeah, not Athens, Georgia. I don't think DJ Sunny Side Up. I'm pretty sure that's Athens. But yeah, we've got Family Mart Latte is awesome. Athens, Greece, indeed. Dan H. I find it's weird that one of the few Japanese companies, Uniqlo, is still investing heavily in China and isn't pulling out. They're truly unique. I think they are heavily invested there in selling as well as producing, as well as sourcing Uyghur slave labor cotton. That said, I like Uniqlo clothes a lot. They're good stuff. But you're right. They've built up a very big business. That's very dependent on that. So, yeah. I agree, Shubhas. However, it is encouraging to see. Well, I wonder if it's a little bit overblown. This is coming into another thing I'll get to a little bit later on, probably in the tweets that I've been doing. China's going hard at the moment on Japan over the Fukushima wastewater emissions, but it clearly is, to me, retaliation over Japan cooperating on sanctions on China on semiconductors, which, there's plenty to, including the treatment of Uyghurs. In fact, if you think of just that, for example, that issue, there's plenty of legitimate reasons, I think, to sanction China and to demand that it's that it needs to do better. But at the same time, lately it's not even phrased in terms of morality or policy or anything like that. It's just phrased in terms of not believing that, it's national security, that China will spy on us if we give them too good semiconductors, and we need to maintain a competitive gap is the thing, which starts to sound like just trying to, hold back a country from, achieving its development potential, which is I find a little bit harder to get on board with. But there's plenty of bad things over there that government does. So anyway, we'll come back to that soon. I see Savas Musician pointing out that Doto coffee has a 340 in S size, but it's a good quality coffee. And indeed, Doto, is a dedicated coffee chain, so it should be. But what I do find is the convenience store coffee in Japan is outstanding. It holds. It seriously takes away really the need. I'll go to Starbucks every now and then if I feel like, a kind of a white mocha or something fancy, but it really takes away the need to go anywhere else, and the value is so good. So yeah. Eric Bailey, work as tears, make the clothes fit better. Everybody knows that. That could be it. That could be that silky smooth feeling of that dry fit shirt. Could the active, what do they call it? The active wear. That could definitely be the tears of the slave laborers. Who knows? Certainly they're not getting paid 1,500 yen per hour in those places. Yeah, and this is kind of interesting. It's kind of a continuation of the theme that I've been talking about a lot on the show, about how I really do still believe that the current yen, which is still around 140 yen to the US dollar, that this is a temporary situation. The yen, correctly, if you look at the Big Mac index, if you look at the value of things, the yen should be below 120 yen to the dollar. And at that level, a lot of prices of things, Japan stops being ridiculously cheap. America has got ridiculous inflation, and things are expensive in America by American standards, and things are kind of going up a little bit in Japan. In fact, actually, American inflation has recently dropped below 3%, whereas Japan's gone kind of from 2% to 3%. So they've kind of crossed over, where some people are saying that Japan now has overtaken America in inflation. That's not really the right way to look at it. Its American inflation rate has fallen below that of Japan. Japan's is going up slowly. But the point being, Japan's yen is devalued at the moment, and there's an ongoing debate whether this is a sign that will the yen correct, and will the yen get stronger and imports get cheaper and everything will balance out again, or is this the way it's going to be forever? And if that's the case, if the yen stays at 140 yen or higher, it's really going to be hard for Japan. Japan's status as, in fact, I've been looking for the right terminology for this, and someone corrected me on this earlier this week, where Japanese themselves say developing country and developed country. They use these categories, and talking about Japan slipping into developing country, which isn't really an accurate term, because Japan is already developed. It's just slipping economically to have wages equivalent to countries that are considered to still be developing. Someone mentioned that the World Bank uses terms like high income, middle income, and low income countries, HIC, MIC, LIC. So Japan is currently slipping from HIC to being at least a MIC at the moment, a middle income country. And the consequences of that is that with Japan's average wages falling below Philippines, now Korea and Taiwan, for example, and Singapore and a lot of other countries. Japan last year had a thing where we had a record low number of Philippines nurses applying for jobs in Japan, and I pointed out this is super significant. The whole, again, there's a big macro picture. There's a big thing happening in Japan. It's been happening now for 30, 40 years. The Japanese government has known for all of this time that the current demographic and economic crisis that Japan is in was coming. And I've shared my view on this show all over and over that what the Japanese government strategy appears to be is not to prevent that from happening. They're not looking to replace all the young people to keep the demographic shape the same. They haven't found a way to be able to stop the economy from declining because of the greater economic factors. They're just looking for a way to manage the decline in a way that sort of is gradual and isn't felt too badly. But one of the assumptions that was clearly being made by policymakers going back 10, 15 years was that when Japan becomes overwhelmed by elderly people and without enough young people paying taxes to pay them welfare or to look after them or care for them, the government's always realized a long time ago that the only way it's going to be able to afford to look after those elderly, or one way is it's going to need to attract people from lower income countries to come and act as nursing care staff for these elderly Japanese. And they set up these offices to promote nurses from Indonesia and from Philippines to come to Japan. And there was this assumption that Japan being a wealthy country and Philippines and Indonesia being poor countries, Japan will be able to attract, all the nurses that they decide to, let in. And based on that assumption that Japan would be very much in a strong position to, attract nursing talent from, lower income countries, that Japan could put in pretty strict, language requirements and qualification requirements, and make it, so that they got the very best of the nurses from the Philippines and from Indonesia coming to Japan. However, what's happened is that now Japan can't afford to attract those people, and arguably the difficulty that they make it based on language and so on, and the fact that they don't offer permanent visas, means that where Japan kind of wasn't really, it was taking for granted that everyone would want to come to Japan as a first choice, and never really appreciated properly that it would be competing for those nurses who themselves, those incomes are rising and Japan's incomes are falling. But also Japan is competing for those nurses for other countries with the same demographic problems like South Korea and Taiwan that also need them. Right now, there's a record low number of people applying for those jobs in Japan. And Japan's plan was that there would always be an oversupply of nurses wanting to come and look after elderly Japanese. So that assumption has been broken, and it's that's kind of a big deal because I think it's broken a key assumption of how Japan was going to manage this decline. So I think that's just an interesting another sign of the time of again the challenge that Japan's having. And this isn't going to just be Japan. Japan is at the head of this wave, but there's a lot of other countries, including China, even European countries and so on, that are all going into the same cycle of a society dominated by elderly that Japan is going through. But this is just another example of perhaps miscalculating some of those assumptions. Dan H saying that you work for Lego. Very, very cool. And U.S. Army in Guantanamo Bay. That's you work for both Lego and the U.S. Army in Guantanamo Bay, tried to make large order with us and tried to sign NDA 889 form, which I asked not to use Chinese equipment, turned down the order. Oh, I'm sorry. So the Army in Guantanamo Bay made an order for you at Lego, and they asked you to sign a form, which was basically an NDA, pledging not to use Chinese 5G equipment. Yeah, so that's their procurement. I see that's their procurement rules, that you have to agree not to be using compromised telecommunications equipment. Of course, because it's military requirements. Turn down the order. That sounds like a lot of hassle to verify, and probably, in Japan, the good news is if you're working from Japan, Japanese companies are so paranoid that I've had this in my own work as well, of Japanese companies wanting to verify that US standards are being met here. Japan is quite happy to go along with US procurement standards of not having any Chinese telco equipment in the supply chain. But, how do you confirm that completely? So, yeah, that kind of, you probably made the right call. It probably wasn't worth it for a Lego set, but yeah. Quickly scanning through the other comments, I'm just going to pay attention to the comments that are, that have my name in them. So Tokyo 503 just wanted to mention that today you watched Being Japanese documentary directed by Greg Lamb on YouTube. Very good, highly recommended. Edo Inoue appeared. Okay, thanks for the recommendation. If you could tweet the link at me, or I might even have a look for it. I'll have a look, see if I can remember. I'll have a look for it afterwards. It sounds like it'd be a good watch, especially Edo Inoue, of course, an American who became a naturalized Japanese. Is a good example of someone to have on that as a topic. So yeah, that'd be super interesting. Going back into the topics, there was a rugby game this week between me swearing at Elon Musk a little bit there. The Samoa versus Japan game was low quality rugby. The Rugby World Cup is happening 40 days from now. And Japan, of course, has done some major upsets over the years. They've beaten some big countries, including South Africa, including Ireland. But when they're playing against Samoa, it's normal that you wouldn't show all your secret moves that you're practicing in the warm-up games before the World Cup. But at the very least, you'd be catching the ball and passing the ball and tackling and kicking. And Japan wasn't doing those things, those basic skills. In fact, they were playing like a bad club rugby team, honestly. It was a below-average game. And Samoa wasn't that hot either, honestly. So it was a disappointing game to watch. But there again, I am looking forward to the World Cup. And, they've still got a month. They've got good coaching staff, and they've got a month to get ready. Talking about China, as we were talking about earlier, there's, again, Japan's export curbs on chip-making equipment to China just took effect. And these are sanctions which it's doing basically in solidarity with America. Someone made a good comment there. Jim Byrne said, the great fish and chips war. So my comment was, it seems logical to me assume that China and Hong Kong's sort of restrictions, non-science-based restrictions on all Japanese seafood, that they're now holding up and stopping imports of all Japanese seafood for radiation testing because of plans that Japan has to release, cooling water from Fukushima into the ocean. This seems to me to be linked to most probably to Japan's sanctions, which kind of could be seen similarly as kind of propagandist and arbitrary against sending semiconductor equipment to China. Japan is stopping China from making silicon chips, and as a result, they're banning Japanese fish. So someone characterized this as the great fish and chips war of 2023, which I was very impressed by. So I thought that was worth sharing. DJ Sunnyside Up asks, would I ever switch to a Japanese passport? There was a passport ranking update the other day where the Japanese passport is indeed more convenient now. Then the New Zealand passport, which for a long time when I came to Japan, the New Zealand passport, I believe, was a stronger passport. You had more visa-free travel from New Zealand than New Zealand used to be like number 2 or number 3. And I think the Japanese passport recently slipped from second to third position. I think Singapore just overtook it. Would I switch to it? If I could have dual citizenship in a heartbeat, I would apply for dual citizenship immediately. And I'd love to get a Japanese passport. Would I renounce my New Zealand passport in order to get a Japanese passport? To live in Japan and to travel anywhere I want to go, my New Zealand passport is great. To live in Japan, I have permanent residence, so I don't need anything more than what I have. So really giving up my New Zealand passport, I wouldn't gain that much by getting a Japanese passport, and I would lose the right to perhaps one day retire in New Zealand if I wanted to, or to let my son go and do university for free, not for free, but for a lot cheaper in New Zealand if I wanted to. I think, life is about making choices that maximize your options. I don't feel like I'm losing anything by not having a Japanese passport. So the short answer is no, but I would get it immediately if I could get it as a second passport. So yeah, it'd be cool to be born in Japan in a way that I could get 2 passports. But of course, to get a Japanese passport, I would have to show that I've renounced my New Zealand citizenship, which I don't want to do, even though I can't vote in New Zealand. If you live overseas for more than 3 years, you lose the right to vote in New Zealand, which is a shame, although you can reactivate it just by visiting. So I think right now I actually technically can vote in New Zealand, which would be nice. But yeah, I've thought about it. I mean, I would like to, but I just don't see a benefit to it myself for my situation anyway. So yeah. Anyway, continuing on, we've got Elon, pay your effing bills. Yes. Oh yeah, cool video here of some Niigata researchers that found a way of a different type of wind turbine that seems pretty cool. Record low number of Philippines nurses applying for jobs in Japan. The next Mazda MX-5 might be electric. This would be awesome. I mean, Tesla's supposed to be making a Roadster themselves, and we're still waiting for that. But I think that would be Mazda's current EV is apparently, even on EV car review blogs, is like a joke. They say do not buy this car. It's like a 100-mile range, and it's terrible. But if you could put like a Tesla type range and performance and put that in a convertible Roadster, that would just be awesome. And I was having a debate in the comments where someone said, isn't that something that the Tesla Roadster was supposed to be? And I pointed out that actually, the Cybertruck has resulted in lots of sales of electric pickup trucks in America. They've made money for every country but Tesla because Tesla never made it. So maybe with the Roadster it might be the same thing. I like the idea of that being an electric car anyway. Robert Brooker, imagine my chagrin when I learned that I could have moved to Montreal and go to uni for free. If that's true, and you didn't do that, I mean, that's a shame. But yeah, indeed. Cobra Stenchi would totally denounce, by the way, it's renounce, R-E, renounce. Denounce is just, screw myself. I denounce my citizenship all the time, but I wouldn't renounce it. Renouncing it would be giving it up. But yeah, I guess Cobra Stenchi, you've got German citizenship, you've got like compulsory military service and stuff like that. There are good reasons to renounce. There's no real downsides to being a New Zealand citizen. There are downsides to being citizens of other countries, I guess. So that is a factor. But yeah, coming down, that's right. So Japan overtakes US in inflation, but really, what's actually happened is that US inflation has just dropped below Japan's. But there again, even at 3%, wages are not going up. So people are still getting progressively poorer in Japan, at least in America, when they have crazy inflation. Generally speaking, wages there are going up as well. So yeah. Yeah. By the way, Cobra Stenchi pointing out the MX30, which is the Mazda EV car, is really bad in comparison to bigger cars. I don't know if it uses a Wankel engine. That's like the rotary engine, isn't it? Is it like an electric wank? I don't even know how that works. But yeah, and also you just reminded me of a movie that I like, a very obscure movie, a Steve Martin movie called My Blue Heaven, where Steve Martin plays an Italian witness protection program sort of informant who is constantly conning people, including he would say that this is the guy who invented the Wankel engine. But yeah, Softy Papa, excellent to see you. Indeed, hope I've seen your Facebook post that you've been jumping in the water. I am missing it there indeed. Yeah, it would have been nice, especially now that it's warmed up there. Great to see you, Kurt. I hope you're doing well and looking forward to seeing you here in Japan. Yeah, no, I had a great time there in Huntington Beach, and thanks again. Softy Papa was very great. He found me, hooked me up with some directions to a fantastic Airbnb by Huntington Beach, and yeah, took me around for a few days. Had a great time hanging out, talking philosophy. Yeah, spent a good bunch of time and had a magical time down in LA. So many thanks to Softy Papa for that, and great to see you there in the comments. Cobra Senshi, the Wankel rotary engine as a range extender has been introduced. Oh, I see. So it's kind of a hybrid. I get it. Well, that makes some more sense, at least anyway. Maddie, good to see you, Maddie. Back into the comments. There are two articles this week actually pointing out these were only for publicly listed companies. Now, bear in mind in Japan, the really rich people in Japan are all working in privately held companies, which don't disclose their salaries and are not public. But for, third biggest economy in the world, until recently second biggest economy in the world, only 120 people earn income from share dividends worth more than $700,000 and there was another video, another comment earlier, another news story earlier than this, talking about executive salaries. And again, only 700 executives in Japan earn more than $700,000 a year, which again just sort of shows how it's kind of amazing in Japan. If you take, while there is still, and there is an ultra rich that exists in Japan, you take the top 1% or whatever and the bottom 1%, Japan does have a fairly stratified gap between rich and poor. But I've read a book by a former Japanese bureaucrat that points out if you take the 10th percentile, like the 90% band of the richest and the 10% of the poorest, the differential between those is actually very, very narrow in Japan, much more narrow than in European and US and other OECD countries. And this is partly just because executive salary, the most that a lot of execs, I've done M&As for famous like global Japanese multinational companies, where C-suite, like, executives with titles beginning like with C, like CTO or CFO or CIO, were earning like, $120,000, $130,000 US a year, which was less than some of the junior US law firm associates doing the due diligence for them. It was Japanese companies. They don't, in America, they've been kind of successful. CEOs have been successful at convincing society and shareholders that you should pay execs based on the value that they generate. If a company, goes from earning $500 million profit to, $900 million profit, it's justifiable to give a CEO a salary of $50 million since they realize $400 million of more value. But it's only the execs that get that. At a certain level below, it's what the appropriate hourly rate is. In Japan, there's a general belief that there's an appropriate salary for each level of seniority, and there's no connection of value, earned or whatever, that should be distributed to CEOs. And actually, if you talk about how most foreign companies that have tried to set up local subsidiaries or have done these joint partnerships with Japanese companies, it's an incredibly high percentage of companies that blow up over the issue of executive compensation in Japanese, including the HR departments themselves rebelling against expats that they think are receiving too much money. In fact, when they decided to string up Gon, remember the first charges that they brought against him were paying himself too much money based on deferred compensation. It was based on resentment at how much money he was earning. And he was probably the top earning CEO in Japan when he was here. And he was quite happy to justify it himself, saying that he created all of this value. But people, in Japan, that's kind of seen as the head of Olympus, who actually engaged in fraud. There was more public backlash against him for the fact he earned more than $700,000, which was seen as being outrageous for a publicly held company, for a public company, than it was that he actually engaged in fraud. So there's this huge belief that people shouldn't be earning too much money in Japan. That's used to sort of suppress wages of executives in Japan. So, no doubt there are people that do earn a lot more money than this, and it's not public. But for people who are in publicly, famous Japanese multinationals, you think of your Toyotas, your Nissans, your, large banks or whatever, they're not earning very much money, which I still find kind of remarkable when you consider how over the top executive salaries are in America, for example. Dan H asks a question. Would there be any benefits of me becoming an Aussie? Answer. only if I want to live in Australia. There's huge benefits, of course. Australia is fairly restrictive. It's getting easier. Australia used to have restrictions that, like in Queensland, you couldn't buy real estate if you weren't an Australian citizen. Even New Zealanders were not allowed to, even though we can live freely and work freely in Australia. I can do a lot in Australia, but for example, you couldn't get student benefits. You couldn't buy land. Those things have improved a lot, but there still is no doubt it would be much easier living in Australia. So again, if I wanted to retire to Australia, which honestly feels maybe a little bit more likely than retiring to New Zealand, I think Australia has better incomes and cheaper cost of living and better weather, frankly. So I'd probably be more likely to retire to Australia. And, having an Australian mother and sister, I think I could get Australian citizenship and add this Australian citizenship anytime that I wanted. There's no real point applying for it from here, from Japan. But yeah, if I ever wanted to settle down in Australia, I believe that I could do it. And there would be, again, the benefits there would be, would be if I wanted to live in Australia. If I'm not living in Australia, frankly, the Australian passport is more restrictive than the New Zealand passport. You can travel to far fewer countries because Australian immigration is tougher, and often immigration arrangements are reciprocal. So, there's benefits if I want to live in Australia, but outside of living in Australia, there aren't that many benefits to it. I guess if you're ever like backpacking in dangerous countries, Australia is more likely to have a consulate than New Zealand. So from that perspective, if you ever think you'll be in a place where you'll need consular assistance, but there again, Australia will substitute for New Zealand where New Zealand doesn't have a location. So not a lot of benefits, but a lot of benefits if I want to live in Australia. So it's something that I would consider if I decide I ever want to live in Australia, but as it is, I'm not. So, and Kiwis can live pretty easily in Australia as it is. So, yeah. Iraq, 299, good to see you. Good evening indeed. The Japan rugby games this summer have been disappointing. They have been, but great showcases when teaching your rugby school kids what not to do. Wow, you're teaching rugby. Much respect. I've coached rugby. I've captained rugby. I've played rugby. I'm a huge fan of rugby. And honestly, yeah, you've seen, there's a lot of, and this idea that the ball used to be made out of leather, and when it would get wet, it was literally like a ball of soap. It was impossible. The ball was slippery and hard to hold. But nowadays, the ball's made out of the synthetic rubber. It doesn't slip. Players would, and I get it. It's easy to drop the ball. It's one thing to catch the ball in practice. It's another thing to catch the ball with a team of big Samoan guys running at you. But there again, if you want to play international rugby, you have to not catch the ball just because a big guy's charging at you. Unfortunately, the basics, that's what I was most disappointed about with the Japan team, was the lack of basic skills. That was disappointing. So well observed, Iraq, and that is awesome that you're teaching rugby. That's really cool. Cobra Stenchi. Years back, there was an article about the CEO of Gel opening an office, sharing an open office with his workers, taking the bus to work and eating lunch with everyone in the company canteen. That's perfectly normal, indeed. And in fact, normally you'd be in an open plan office, and I've worked at Fujitsu, I've worked at companies where, that is absolutely the case. Even the most senior people will sit in an open area. So, Eric Bailey, Carlos Ghosn is your hero. You hope too to flee this country as a filthy rich man. Exactly. The fact he's like this week, I didn't even cover it. The fact that he's like talking to the Foreign Correspondents Club of Japan about how Japan is a terrible hostage, justice country, which it is. But dude, for a person who was given the very rare and privileged treatment of being allowed to be under home arrest and then, skip the country with paying the bloody A-team to smuggle you out in a cello case, or the speaker's case or whatever on a private jet, and hiding in a house in Lebanon that Nissan paid for. Oh, I mean, if you weren't a criminal during the hostage justice trial, you certainly are a criminal now from how you got out of the trial. So, you're not the best person to represent Japanese injustice. So, yes, indeed. Well said, Eric Bailey. Well, lots of people rocking in here. Waito-san, no problem at all. Come in anytime. You can watch it recorded. Softy Papa, maybe Japanese executives enjoy a sense of compensation with prestige. I don't know. I mean, certainly there is that thing that I guess people are probably proud. One thing I like about Japanese executives is that because they sit with all the workers, and they're not, in America, you get these MBA executives who bounce from company to company. You hear about the company, the new CEO of such and such company was until now CEO for 5 years of this company, and then was CEO of this company, and so on. In Japan, all the execs of all the big companies came up from being line workers. They've all worked in those companies for decades. And what it means is when you're doing things like building systems for them, even the most senior people know exactly how everything works. They talk like they're founder owners, and that's kind of cool. Another thing I like about Japan is how even when you go to a rich neighborhood, if you go to Azabu-Juban or Jugaoka or some of the really rich neighborhoods in Tokyo, Hiro, whatever, there are subtle differences. You'll notice everyone's clothes will be kind of neatly pressed. Everyone will be very tidy. But people don't dress ostentatiously. They don't have flashy houses. They don't drive flashy cars. There's this sort of dressed down culture of not flaunting wealth in Japan, which is kind of cool. But again, that reflects in the mentality that there'll be a backlash if people know that you're getting paid too much. So yeah, DJ Sunny side up. Is rugby popular in America? I watched a number of Seattle Seawolves rugby games in Seattle, and they were full. It was a full stadium. It was sort of a second tier sport compared to like obviously professional sports in America, but like football or baseball or whatever. But yeah, it was pretty popular. It's a good rugby population there, and they have some good players over there as well, including some ex-New Zealand players who have gone over there to go and get some nice salaries. We've got a couple of minutes left, so I'm gonna speed run through remaining topics of what I thought was interesting this week, and then I'm gonna close out. So rainy season finally declared over. Oh my god, I'm not even through a day. I've got 7 days worth of tweets, and I didn't even get through a day today. So yeah, 72 micro seasons, but today is Taisho, so that sucks. Hong Kong and China definitely retaliation for the fish inspections are retaliation for the semiconductor sanctions. Gearoid Reedy, who I follow, who seems to aggravate particularly a lot of anti-nuclear people and so on. He kind of goes after people who he thinks are kind of playing up BS stories about Japan, which I must admit I get similarly wound up. I get wound up by similar things. I've never seen him before. There's a little video of him there on TikTok. He wasn't dancing, which was disappointing, but kind of talking about how weird Japan stories are nothing to smile about. It's people basically making fun of Japan and using inconsistent standards. And I kind of agree with that. I kind of like the TikTok, although I wish he had dance. Motoko Rich talking there about how some people are skeptical Japan's trying to make coal cleaner by mixing it with ammonium, which does make it cleaner. It does make it to the extent you have to use it. But some people saying you shouldn't be making coal cleaner, you should be getting rid of it, which Japan should be by, frankly, restarting the nuclear power plants, which is awful, of course, after Fukushima, but it's clean, and Japan doesn't have a good alternative. So I'm kind of, even as someone who used to be an environmental lawyer and policy consultant, I'm kind of sympathetic to the idea that you should be trying to do the best you can do at any given moment. But sure, I get it. If you're trying to make coal cleaner, then you might use coal for longer. So yeah, this guy got arrested this week. This is Ukrainian news, but this guy in Russia, of course, is the guy who was convicted. He was in charge of the unit that shot down Malaysian Airlines Flight 17. Killed hundreds of people, was hailed as a hero in Russia was actually given medals and whatnot. However, he's now in jail because he called Putin a coward and said that the whole military campaign in Ukraine was doomed to fail, and Russia had to prepare itself for having to give Crimea back. And to be clear, he's one of the far right, pro-nationalist, pro-invasion. He's one of the people who invaded Crimea and even shot down, a Malaysian airline for Russia. So, even he's turning on Putin at the moment. So it's a good thing to see all of that falling apart. All the work that Rochelle Kopp's been doing, calling for a rethink of the plan to redevelop the Meiji-Gaien area, including chopping down a lot of those lovely trees. Even the Mainichi Shimbun now, a lot of voices, NHK is now covering this, Mainichi Shimbun covering for a reconsideration of that plan from the Tokyo governor. So, that's showing again that Rochelle Kopp's activism really paying off. Data breach, where apparently a contract employee inappropriately stole the personal information of 5 million customers of NTT Docomo. Again, I guess I have to check if I'm pretty sure that security of personal information does not meet the requirements of the law, which is that the information has to be kept securely in Japan. But the fact that it happened from a contractor is disappointing. And all this other stuff. There's a wee earthquake the other day. Tony Bennett passed away, big Hokusai fan. This is super cool. I shared a tweet of an actress from from Yonaguni, which is actually, it's in between Okinawa. It's part of Okinawa Prefecture, but it's in between Okinawa and Taiwan. It's very, very close to Taiwan. And they have a separate dialect and a separate culture, even to Okinawa. And their language, she's doing this sort of kind of rapping in Yonaguni dialect. And she mixes it with some Japanese, standard Japanese, but it's a completely different language. And even the sounds that they make, it sounds kind of Korean almost. It's really, really cool. So that was super cool. Anyway, something that I found that was cool. And what else? Watching currency changes with urgency. I don't know how you watch with urgency, but they did that. Yeah, Japan realists South Korea as a preferred trading partner. Lots of other stuff happening this week. I've only gone back 2 days, but we're already up on time. So I'm gonna stop it there. But anyway, thank you so much for keeping me company. I hope that you're all well. Do remember to hit the like button. The 24 likes, 28 views. Wow, that's a pretty good ratio, actually. I do appreciate it. I'm going to call it there. Remember, hey, Sadiq, good to see you, Sadiq. Hakangur, our man from Florida. Good to have you there in the chat. I'm gonna call it there tonight. I'm gonna go have a sleep. Remember, you can follow me on Twitter if you want to keep up with me during the week and chat with me about this stuff. It's still hot, so remember to hydrate. It's cold, of course, if you're in the southern hemisphere, so rug up. But if you're in the northern hemisphere, drink water, get some sleep, use the air conditioning, and I'll see you all next week. Do take care. I'm going to call up Victor this week. We'll look at doing a 2.5 Voyages next week in the same time slot, 10:30 p.m. Japan Standard Time. So, there's the article about the executive compensation that I was talking about. So have a good week, everybody, and boom, peace. Slake Nansen, good to see you. See you next week indeed. Good night, Softy Papa. Good morning to all of you people waking up, and good afternoon, depending where you are in the world. Have a good one, everyone. Boom. See you later. Any stream.